Hey guys, welcome back. So we're going to continue with vectors, and now that we've gone through our shape tools here, the rectangle tool, ellipse tool, and we've gotten a better understanding now of shapes, paths, and pixels, we're going to switch gears to the pen tool now. And anytime you're working with the pen tool, you are always working with vectors, whether it be shapes or paths. But the pen tool is designed for vector-based images, and we have some editing tools here that we can use as well. So if you've ever used the pen tool before, which we did a little bit at the beginning, we used the pen tool for that mock flyer exercise when we were making that wave at the bottom. But the pen tool takes a little bit of getting used to. It's a little bit weird to handle. It has what's called Bezier curves and handles that you use to affect the direction and the strength of the curves that you might want to be making. And it takes a little bit of getting used to, but there is a process behind it. So let's start with just the basic pen tool right here, and let's make sure we're on path. And if I just click around without dragging, if I just click points around, we can see this works just like the polygonal line tool, right? And everywhere I click, it's putting down what's called an anchor point. And then if I come back to my starting anchor point, we see I get that circle. And that, if I click there, that closes the path for me. And again, all of these anchor points here are what's defining this shape. And if I hover over an anchor point, notice I get that minus symbol. And if I click, that's going to delete that anchor point, right? And then I can delete as many of these as I need to. And then if I hover over the path itself, we see that it changes to a plus sign, and that will add in anchor points that we can then edit and manipulate. Okay, so that's essentially what these two tools are right here. Add anchor point tool, delete anchor point tool, right? You don't necessarily have to select those because as you hover over the path, you'll automatically get that symbol that will change that will let you know if you're adding or subtracting an anchor point. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let me delete all of that. So now the fun stuff. So now notice if I click in a spot and then I click and I'm holding right now, and notice if I drag out, these are my handles, right? These will determine the direction and the strength of the curve. Now, I think you're just going to have to, if you've never used the pen tool before, I think the best way to go about learning it is just to use it, because it'll take some time to get used to getting these curves to do what you want to do. But just notice the way that this curve is moving as I move this handle around, right? And wherever I leave off, so if I let go, the next place I click, the curve is going to be extending out where that handle is coming out, right? So again, you'll just have to kind of play around with this, and I'll show you some tricks that we can use and how we can edit these curves individually. But this might be a time to maybe pause the video and just kind of work with this for a little bit, right? And we can see, right? We can see how these curves are being affected by how I'm placing these handles and where I'm moving, right? But if I come back to the beginning, right, notice I get that closed loop, and I'll just close that there. And so a couple of things that we can do once we've had our path made is, again, we can add anchor points, right? We can subtract anchor points. But if we wanted to come back and edit over one of our points, or maybe we want to come in and we want to change, right? We want to change the handle, we want to change the curves. If you hold Command, right? If I hold down Command and click over one of these anchor points, you'll see that right now they're all open, right? They're all white, but if I hover over one, it turns blue. And then if I click on it, right, then it selects it and it's ready to be edited. And you can do a couple of different things here. So if I click on here, and then now if I click and hold, I can then readjust this position, right? And I can do this for all of them. And I could add anchor points and click, and right, you can really get, you can really do a lot of fine tuning and editing here just by adding anchor points or taking them away, right? So again, that's Command. And then if I click on an anchor point, same thing, I can readjust these Bezier curves again. So I can click on an anchor point, and then I can notice the handles are circles. If I hover over one, I can click, and then I can edit that curve even further, right? Okay. The other thing that you want to know too is option, right? So there's command and then option. An option, what that does is if I hover over an anchor point, that turns it into the convert point tool, which is the one at the very bottom here. So the shortcut key for that would be just option. If I click over one of these anchor points, if I just click, notice it takes away those curves, right? And then if I click and drag, it will add them back, okay? So that's helpful for when, like, for example, right here, if I have this curve right here, but if I just wanted this to be an angle, if I just wanted this to be a V shape, I would be holding option. If I hover over here and then click, that takes away those Bezier curves, and then it leaves me with an angle, okay? What it also lets me do too is if I hold command and if I click, right, and I bring up my handles again, if I hold option and hover over the handle here, I can click and just edit that one curve, that one side of the curve, okay? Again, so that's option, right? Okay. So, why don't you try to outline this shark using just those tools, using just the pen tool, and then adding and deleting anchor points, because I just want you to get a feel for it. And there is another tool that I'll introduce here in a moment, but I'll give you a second to work with that. Okay. So the Curvature Pen Tool is what I'll introduce here. Now, this is a fantastic tool, and it's newer, so some of you may not have seen this before, but if you have and you know how to use it, you'll know that this is a really, really great tool that, in all honesty, I use this much more than I do the pen tool, because this tool does feel pretty intuitive. So let's just use our shark as an example here. Let's just say we wanted to turn this shark into a vector, right, or into a path. So using the curvature line tool, or curvature pen tool, sorry, let me show you how this works. So I'm just going to start here. I'm going to click, and then I'm just going to click right here, okay? And I'm clicking, I'm holding, right? And I can move around, and notice there's no handles that come out. There's no Bezier curves, and I just have a straight line, okay? But what you can do here is if I just hover over the path, you see I have a plus sign to add an anchor point. I can just click and then drag this curve where I need it. And this is kind of editing in real time. So any anchor point that I click on, I can click and move. Oops, sorry. I didn't want to click on that beginning one because then that closes it. But if I click on the anchor point, or if I click on the path, it will automatically add an anchor point and then let me edit it at the same time. Okay? And then, so I'm going to continue with the shark here. So this is where I left off. If I click here, right, and then I can click here. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll make 2 points, and then I'll make that third in the middle to adjust the curve. But notice what I did here. We get this smooth curve, but that's not what we want, right? We want a hard transition, right? Because this angle is pretty clear. What you do is you would just hover over the anchor point that you want. Remember that convert point tool where it took away that curve and made it an angle? Well, with the curvature pen tool, all we have to do is just double click, right? So if I double click, it takes away the curve, or it'll add it back again, right? So I'll double click there and to take that away. So this is where I left off, right? Notice I'll click right here, and this gives me kind of that sweeping curve, but I don't want that because, again, that's coming to a point. So if I hover over this point and then just double click, that makes it a straighter angle, and then I can just click inside of this line and I can just drag this to the curve that I need, right? I can click right here, and then I can drag this curve to where I need it. But again, notice I want a harder transition here. I want an angle here. I don't want a sweeping curve. So I would hover over here and then double click, right? And then you can adjust your anchor points as you need. So here's another, I'll click here. And then again, it's giving me the curve that I don't want. So I'm going to double click there to get my angle, and then click here to drag that out. So again, this is where you might want to pause the video and just get a feel for this, right? You can see that this tool is, in my opinion, this tool is quite a bit more manageable. You just kind of have to understand where you want your transition, where you want your angles to be, or not angle, where you want those changes to be angles or softer curves, right? Okay, so again, so here's a point where I would want it to be a harder change. So I'm going to double click there, and I'll click inside here, and I'll drag up. Okay, again, I'm going to double click, click and drag this here. Okay, double click, and then I'll close that loop. Double click there. So lots of double clicking here. So then once the path is made and closed, you can come back in and again, if you hover over the anchor point, you can click and make changes. And again, if I wanted to bring back that soft curve instead of the angle, I would just double click and that brings it right back. Okay, so that's the Curvature Pen Tool, which is a really, really nice way of using it for curves. And what I'd like to have you guys do with this exercise, so it's kind of a shorter one, but what I'd like you to do is you're going to do what I just did, right? You're gonna create a path of this shark, and notice there's nothing here, right? Because our paths are here, remember? And what you're going to do is I'd like you to get this selection, or not, sorry, I would like you to make this vector as close as you can to the shark, getting some experience with these pen tools. And then what I'll have you do is fill this path, and to do that, make sure when you come back to your layers here, make sure you create a new layer, right? So we're on a new layer, and then when we come to path, you can just right click and fill path, and select color, and just any color here is fine. Okay, just hit OK. So that fills it in. And if we come back to layers, we see that we have that here. And remember, anytime you fill or stroke a path, that rasterizes, that'll come in as pixels. So it's not as a vector image. So then we can move this image down, move this shape down. But notice our path is still here, right? And if we wanted to move that, we could come to our path selection tool, and then you can click and you could drag that, right? So I'm going to have you create a vector of the shark down below, and then with the path still selected, just to get some practice, I'd like to see you stroke that path, right? So if we could make a select, let's pick our brush tool, and okay, that'll work just fine. And then there we go. Stroke the path with a brush, right? So just a little practice exercise. Get some time in with that pen tool and get used to it, and then just submit this to me just so I can see that you're following along and that you're understanding the pen tool. And don't get frustrated. I know the pen tool can be, at least for me, when they came out with this Curvature Pen Tool, that was a really nice really nice thing for me, because I sometimes struggle with that pen tool. But go ahead and work on this, get some practice with the pen tool, and I will see you guys next time.